I held his hand while life slipped away, and the last thing he asked me was something I could never fulfill. Until today, my name is James Washington. I'm 87 years old, and there's a weight I've been carrying for over 60 years. A weight that no medal, no honor, no thank you for my service could ever lift from my chest. Because I lost my best friend in the war, and it wasn't just that. I promised him something that haunts me to this day. I met Thomas in 1962 at a basic training camp in Fort Benning, Georgia. Back then, being black in the armed forces still meant fighting a double battle, the war out there and the prejudice inside the uniform itself. Thomas was different. He was 2 years younger than me, only 19 years old. But he carried a wisdom in his eyes that seemed decades old. He came from a family of farmers in Alabama, was the oldest of 7 siblings. He enlisted not out of blind patriotism or a search for adventure, but out of necessity. The family needed the pay he would send home. I remember, like it was yesterday, the first day we really talked. It was a Sunday afternoon, and most of the recruits had gone into town. I was sitting under an oak tree writing a letter to my mother when he approached. "You draw?" he asked, pointing to the notebook in my lap. "I try," I replied. "My mother likes to receive drawings along with letters." He smiled, that smile that became so familiar in the following years, a smile that could light up the darkest day. My mother would love that too. "Could you teach me?" And that's how it started. On weekends, while others drank or looked for trouble, the two of us would draw. I taught the little I knew, and he absorbed everything like a sponge. Thomas had a natural talent I would never have. In 1965, we were deployed to Vietnam. We arrived in Saigon on a gray July day, the humid heat sticking to our skin like a second layer of clothing. The smell was a mixture of aviation fuel, wet earth, and something else I couldn't identify. Later, I discovered it was the smell of fear mixed with death. We were assigned to the same company, Charlie Company, 1st Battalion. In war, you quickly discover who your true brothers are. Thomas and I became inseparable. In the first weeks, we still tried to maintain some normalcy. Thomas carried a small notebook in his uniform pocket, protected by plastic. Every time we had a moment of calm, which was rare, he would draw. He drew landscapes, the faces of comrades, even the Vietnamese children we met in the villages. "When I get back home," he would say, his eyes fixed on the paper, "I want to remember that there was beauty here too, not just horror." I watched in silence, admiring his ability to find light in the midst of darkness. Where I saw only destruction, he saw humanity. But Vietnam has a way of stealing those things from you piece by piece. The months dragged on like years. We saw things young men should never see. Friends who laughed with us at breakfast were dead before dinner. The sound of helicopters became a constant soundtrack in our minds, a sound that, decades later, still makes me shudder. I remember one mission in particular. In November 1966, our company had been sent to clear an area where there was supposedly Viet Cong activity. It was an ambush. It always was. The shooting started out of nowhere. One second, we were advancing through the dense vegetation. The next second, the world exploded in fire and metal. Screams, explosions, the smell of gunpowder burning your nostrils. I saw Thomas throw himself on top of a new recruit. A kid named Miller, he was only 18 years old, had been in the country less than a week. A grenade had fallen near them. Thomas pushed the kid back and threw himself in the opposite direction, pulling 2 other soldiers with him. The explosion threw them into the air, but they all survived. When silence finally came, I found Thomas sitting against a tree, his ear bleeding, his hand trembling as he tried to light a cigarette. "You saved those boys," I said, sitting next to him. He just shook his head, looking at the horizon. "James," he whispered, "I don't know how much longer I can do this, how much longer I can pretend we're invincible." I put my hand on his shoulder. There were no right words. There never are. April 1967. We had been in the jungle for almost 2 weeks on a search-and-destroy operation near the Cambodian border. We had lost 3 men in minor skirmishes. Morale was at rock bottom. Thomas was different that last week, quieter. Sometimes I caught him looking at the sky with an expression I couldn't decipher. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like resignation. The night before it happened, we were on guard together. The moon was full, illuminating the forest with a ghostly light. "James," he said suddenly, breaking the silence, "are you afraid of dying?" The question caught me off guard. I swallowed hard before answering, "Every day." "And you?" He was silent for a long moment. "It's not dying I'm afraid of. It's being forgotten, that my life meant nothing." He took the sketchbook from his pocket, now worn and stained. "If something happens to me, James, you need to promise me something." "Don't talk like that, Tom." "No, listen." He grabbed my arm tightly. "I need you to take this to my family, especially to my younger sister, Sarah. She was 12 when I left. Promise you'll tell her I thought about them every day, that I tried to be a good man, that I tried to find beauty even here." I pushed the notebook back to him. "You'll deliver this to her yourself when we get back home." He smiled, that sad smile I would learn to hate. "Promise, James." "I promise." April 24th, 1967. The date is burned into my brain like it was yesterday. We received orders to advance toward a village where there was supposedly a Viet Cong weapons depot. Intelligence was wrong. It was another ambush. They hit us from 3 sides at the same time. It was absolute chaos. Men screaming, explosions, the whistle of bullets cutting through the air. I was shooting, moving, trying to keep my men alive, when I heard the scream, "Grenade!" I turned and saw it. The grenade had fallen right in the middle of a group of 6 soldiers who were entrenched behind a pile of sandbags. There was no time. They were dead, except Thomas was running. Everything happened in slow motion and at the same time too fast. I saw him throw himself over the grenade, his body covering the explosive. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and then the explosion. I screamed his name and ran. The other soldiers were stunned, but alive. Thomas had absorbed most of the impact. I reached him and, God, I can't describe it, what that explosion did. But he was still conscious, still alive. "Thomas, Thomas, hang on!" I screamed for the medic, but I already knew. We all knew. I held his hand while blood poured out. He tried to speak, but could barely breathe. I brought my ear close to his lips. "The notebook," he whispered, each word an immense effort. "My family, you promised." "I will, I promise, but you're going to survive, Thomas. Hang on." "Sarah," his words were getting weaker, "tell her that I loved her, that every day I drew to remember why it's worth living." His words turned into a gurgle. Blood filled his mouth. I squeezed his hand tighter, tears streaming down my face. You saved them, Tom. You saved 6 men. You're a hero, you hear? A hero?" He tried to smile, that smile, for the last time, and then his eyes became empty. The hand I was holding became heavy, and the best man I ever knew was gone. I held him there, under enemy fire, tears mixed with blood and dirt, and I screamed. I screamed until my voice broke. I screamed until someone dragged me back behind cover. Those 6 men Thomas saved survived the war. They all went home to their families, had children, grandchildren, lived entire lives because of my best friend. I returned from Vietnam in September 1967, physically whole, but completely destroyed inside. I had Thomas's notebook in a plastic bag, protected, along with my few possessions. For weeks, I looked at that notebook. I got his family's address through military records. I tried to write letters. I started dozens of them. I never finished any. How could I put it into words? How could I look into the eyes of his mother, his siblings, little Sarah, who was now 14 years old, and tell them what happened? How could I deliver that blood-stained notebook and expect them to understand? I went through it in my head 1,000 times. Imagined knocking on the door of that farm in Alabama. Imagined the expression on their faces when they saw a stranger in uniform on the porch. And every time, every damn time, I froze. Fear paralyzed me, not fear of dying. I had already faced death. It was fear of living with the truth, of making that pain real for them, of turning their son, their brother, into more than just an impersonal military notification. So I did what many veterans do. I buried everything. I kept the notebook at the bottom of a box, pushed the memories to the darkest corner of my mind, and tried to move on. I tried to build a life. I married a good woman named Dorothy. We had 2 children. I worked in a factory for 35 years. I went to church on Sundays. I had barbecues in the backyard. From the outside, it looked like I was fine. But at night, when everyone was sleeping, I saw Thomas's face. I saw that last smile. I heard his words, "You promised." The years passed. My children grew up. Dorothy noticed there was something I kept inside, but never pressed. She knew the war had left scars that couldn't be seen. I tried a few times to find Thomas's family. In the 80s, I got a phone number through a friend. I dialed. A woman answered. I hung up before speaking. I did this 3 times before giving up. In 1995, I went to a Vietnam veterans reunion. I met 2 of the men Thomas saved that day, Miller and Rodriguez. They hugged me and cried, thanking me for serving with him, saying they thought about Thomas every day. "He was a true hero," Miller said, his voice choked. "I have 3 children now. My oldest daughter is in college. All of this because your friend decided our lives were worth more than his. That should have given me peace. But it only intensified the guilt. Those men had built lives, families, legacies, all thanks to Thomas. And what had I done? Kept a notebook in a box. Broken a promise. Dorothy died in 2003 from cancer. In her last days, she held my hand and said, "James, whatever burden you carry, don't take it to the grave. Promise you'll do the right thing before you go." I promised, but still, I did nothing. Everything changed 3 years ago, when my grandson Marcus came to visit me. He had just graduated with a degree in history and was doing research on black veterans in the Vietnam War. "Grandpa," he said, "you never talk about the war, but I'd like to hear. Your stories are important." Something in his sincerity, in the way he looked at me, broke something inside me. After decades, I started talking. I told him about Thomas. I told him everything. And when I finished, Marcus had tears in his eyes. "Grandpa, do you still have his notebook?" I nodded. "You need to find his family. They deserve to know. They deserve to have this piece of him back." "It's been 50 years, Marcus. Maybe it's too late." He shook his head firmly. "It's never too late to honor a hero's memory. It's never too late to keep a promise." Those words echoed in me. Marcus helped me search. With the internet, it was easier than I imagined. We discovered that Thomas's mother had died in 1989, his father 2 years later. But Sarah was still alive. Sarah Washington Coleman, living in Birmingham, Alabama, retired teacher, widow with 3 adult children and 5 grandchildren. Marcus found a phone number, printed the address, put everything in my hand. "Now it's up to you, Grandpa." It took another 6 months before I had the courage, 6 months of rehearsing what I would say, of holding that old notebook and imagining delivering it into Sarah's hands. Finally, on an October morning last year, Marcus drove me to Birmingham. It was a 7-hour drive. We didn't talk much. He held my hand from time to time, reminding me he was with me. Sarah's house was a modest building in a quiet neighborhood. There were flowers in the garden, an American flag on the porch, a swing where the grandchildren probably played. I stood on the sidewalk for 10 minutes, just looking. Marcus waited patiently. "Ready?" he finally asked. I took a deep breath. I held the notebook against my chest. "Ready." We walked to the door. My hand trembled when I rang the doorbell. Footsteps. The door opened, and there she was. Sarah, now 64 years old, gray hair. But I could see Thomas in her eyes, in the shape of her smile when she greeted us. "Can I help you?" she asked kindly. My voice almost failed. "Mrs. Coleman, my name is James Washington. I served with your brother Thomas in Vietnam." I saw the instant change in her expression. Surprise. Then something deeper. An old pain that never really healed. "Thomas," she whispered, "you knew my brother?" "He was my best friend," I managed to say, tears already starting. "And I should have come here 50 years ago." Sarah invited us in. Her house was full of photographs, her family, her children, grandchildren. But in a place of prominence in the living room, there was a single framed photo of Thomas in uniform, smiling at the camera. He looked so young, so full of life. We sat in the living room. Sarah prepared coffee with hands that also trembled slightly. When we finally settled, she looked at me with those eyes that so reminded me of her brother. "Please," she said, "tell me about him, about who he was there. It's been 50 years, and I still miss him every day." And then I told her. I told her everything, about how we met, about the drawings, about his impossible kindness in the midst of hell, about how he saved those 6 men, about his last moments. Sarah cried. I cried. Marcus cried. We cried for the young man who gave everything and for all the years that passed. When I finished, I took out the notebook. It was wrapped in protective fabric, preserved as best I could during all these decades. "He made me promise," I said, my voice breaking, "that I would bring this to you. He said to tell you how he thought about you all every day, that he tried to be a good man, that even in war he tried to find beauty." I placed the notebook in her hands. Sarah held it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Carefully, she opened the cover. The first page had a drawing of the family farm, done from memory, but perfectly detailed. Underneath, in Thomas's careful handwriting, home. She turned the pages slowly. There were dozens of drawings, Vietnamese landscapes, faces of soldiers, local children laughing, and interspersed throughout, small notes and messages. One page said, "Sarah will be 13 tomorrow. I hope she's having the party she always dreamed of." Another, "Mom would have had a birthday today. I miss her laugh." Yet another, "Dad, I know you told me to be strong. I'm trying." Sarah couldn't stop crying. "I didn't know," she sobbed. "I didn't know that he thought about us so much." "Always," I said. "He talked about you all the time. You were the reason he kept going. His light in the darkness." She hugged the notebook against her chest, rocking slightly. "All these years, they told me he was a hero, that he saved lives, but we never knew who he really was, what his heart was like." She looked up at me, and I saw so much emotion there, pain, yes, but also gratitude. "Mr. Washington, James, thank you. Thank you for bringing my brother home. Thank you for finally giving me this piece of him." "Forgive me," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "Forgive me for waiting so long, for being a coward, for keeping this when you should have had it decades ago." She interrupted me, holding my hand. "No, there's nothing to forgive. Pain does this to us. It paralyzes us. But you're here now. You kept your promise. And Thomas, I know that wherever he is, he's at peace, knowing this. I spent 3 days in Birmingham. Sarah introduced me to her whole family, her children, all with middle names Thomas, in honor of the uncle they never met. Her grandchildren, curious about the family hero's story. I told stories about Thomas, shared memories, answered questions. And for the first time in 50 years, I felt a weight being lifted. Not completely, never completely, but enough to breathe. Sarah organized a small memorial. She invited other veterans from the area, neighbors, her church. She displayed Thomas's drawings, now carefully preserved in frames. At that ceremony, the 6 men Thomas saved, or at least 4 of them who were still alive, came to pay their respects. They brought their families. In total, we counted 4 men, 11 children among them, 23 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. 43 lives, 43 people who exist because Thomas chose, in a moment of impossible courage, to give everything. Miller, now 73 years old, held Sarah's hand and said, "Your brother gave me an entire lifetime. He gave me the chance to be a father, a grandfather. Every moment of joy I've had in the last 50 years, I owe to him. I want you to know he wasn't forgotten. My entire family knows his name, knows his sacrifice." Each of the other men said something similar. And Sarah finally saw the true impact of her brother's sacrifice. Not just abstract numbers in a military citation, but real lives, real laughter, real love. I'm here today at 87 years old telling this story because I carry a lesson I learned too late, but that I hope others can take with them. War steals a lot from us. It steals innocence. It steals companions. It steals pieces of our souls. But sometimes it also steals our courage to do what's right, not on the battlefield, but after, in the life we live with the weight of memories. I let fear paralyze me for 50 years. Fear of facing the pain, of making everything real, of having to relive that terrible moment over and over again. And in that process, I denied a family the comfort of knowing the true heart of a hero. Thomas died as a hero, yes, But he lived as a good, kind man who found beauty where others saw only horrors, who loved his family with every breath, who cared so much about others that he made the ultimate sacrifice. Sarah told me, before I left, that the notebook had become her family's most precious possession. She digitized it, shared it with everyone. Her grandchildren did school presentations about hero Uncle Thomas. One of her granddaughters is studying art, inspired by his drawings. "You gave us a gift," she said, "not just the notebook, but the truth of who he was. For 50 years, Thomas was a picture on the wall and a letter from the government. Now he's real again. Now we can know him. I have little time left on this earth. My health is not what it used to be, but I can go in peace now, knowing that I finally kept my promise. If there's anything I want to leave for those who hear this story, it's this: don't let fear or pain stop you from doing what's right. Don't carry unfulfilled promises to the grave. The people we love, that we lost, their memories deserve to be honored. Their stories deserve to be told. Thomas gave everything that day in April 1907. The least I could do was ensure that his sacrifice, his kindness, his humanity were not forgotten. And now, thanks to that old stained notebook, thanks to a promise finally kept, Thomas lives. He lives in the stories Sarah tells her grandchildren. He lives in the drawings his great-niece makes, inspired by the uncle she never met. He lives in the 43 people who exist because of him. H.